Hi everyone, my name is Emma JD and this is my cultural immersion project, and I chose the religion of Islam, and the people who follow it are Muslims. To start off, you have to kind of know the founder of Islam, which is Muhammad. I read his biography so that way I could really get a full understanding of the founding of the religion. He was born in Mecca in 570 AD. He was born pretty much an orphan. His dad died before he was born, and his mom died when he was still a really young kid. He was adopted by family, but grew up kind of poor and lived a very simple life as a shepherd until he got a gig to do a travel caravan, and the widow who was in charge of it was so impressed with him, they got married. So then he at least had some money rolling in, but he still was overall a pretty simple person. Very spiritual. People revered him already as a very wise spiritual person, and he received his first revelation on a little spiritual retreat he took in 610 AD. He was 40 years old. He received it from the angel Gabriel, who basically told him that God wanted his people to come back to him, that he wanted people to stop following the idols of the region, and that Muhammad was going to be his prophet and messenger towards these people. Muhammad eventually started preaching these ideas as he got more and more revelations, but the people in Mecca, the leaders of it especially, were not keen on this monotheism idea. They had a shrine in their city called the Kaaba, and they had a pilgrimage where people from all over the region would come over and worship the different idols that were inside the Kaaba every year. But if people were going to start following monotheism, then all of a sudden they wouldn't have a reason to come to Mecca, and they wouldn't have a reason to trade and give money towards the idols and stuff like that. So they saw him as a threat and kind of persecuted him and kicked him out, and he fled to the nearby city of Yathrib, or it later was called Medina, or the city of the prophets. In Medina, he grew really, really strong. He gained more and more followers and made alliances with local tribes. He was able to fight off the attacks from Mecca and eventually retook Mecca himself in 630 AD. And he finally was able to cleanse the Kaaba of all the idols, fulfill what God had told him to do to bring the people back to one God, Allah. And that was kind of his big accomplishment at the end there. People still go to Mecca, as you can see in this picture. Every single day. Every year there's a pilgrimage that still goes to Mecca, and they walk around the Kaaba 7 times. You can see thousands and thousands of Muslims who pilgrimage over to Mecca. It's supposed to be something you want to do once in your lifetime if you're a good Muslim. Things that were well known about Muhammad: he cared for orphans and women. He was an orphan, so I think he had always a heart for those that were poor, forgotten in society. And he treated women very differently than most people at the time. He really respected his wife, who ran the caravan, and let her run her own business, and he was happy to just be on the sidelines and support her. He taught that men and women should be equal, which was unheard of in his region at the time. So he had a high respect for treating everybody as equal. He gave grace to enemies instead of vengeance. Not all of the time. There are a few times where he believed God asked him to give vengeance through bloodshed, but most of the time he went against tradition and didn't shed blood. He gave almost everything he had to the poor when he won booty in battles. He gave most of it to Islam and to people who were struggling, who were Muslims that were struggling. There were times where he barely had food to eat. And he was revered by almost everyone who met him. Of course, the people who rubbed him the wrong way didn't like him, but almost everyone who met him thought he was a wise and just person. After he died, just a few key things about Islam from there on. There were 4 rightly guided caliphs or successors who carried on his mission of spreading Islam throughout the world, bringing people back to Allah. The 4th caliph notably caused a split in Islamic believers. There was some argument about who was the proper caliph. And even though one did end up reigning supreme, there's still 2 tribes, essentially, of Muslim believers, the Sunni and the Shiite. And the Sunni were the stronger power and ended up making the empire you can see in this picture after fighting the Byzantine and Persian empires. And by 756 AD, look at all of this land they had conquered. So they had a huge realm of influence. Until the 20th century, for like nearly 1400 years, there were so many different dynasties and empires, all ruled by either caliphs or sultans, and these were all Muslims, and all in the name of Allah. They ruled their country under Islamic law. They did have some threats from the Crusaders and the Mongols at points, but they always managed to fight them off or morph into a different kind of society. The Ottoman Empire was the last greatest Muslim empire, but it was finally defeated in World War I, and that kind of was the end of a big Islam regime. There was a general called Mustafa Kemal, and he officially ended the caliphate and the sultanate. And he really was a proponent for independent Islamic states. So these Middle Eastern countries you can see around here, they started winning their independence from the colonial powers after World War I. And by like the 1960s, they were more or less the states that we know them as they are today. All right, so for me to get a more cultural understanding of what was going on, the cultural event that I visited was a mosque. So every Friday, Muslims go to pray. Men are required. It's mandatory for them. And women and children, they are supposed to go if they can, but it's not obligatory. Even though Muslims pray 5 times a day, Friday is like the equivalent to Jews going to temple on Shabbat and Sabbath, and equivalent for Christians going to church on Sunday. So Friday is like their day of worship. When I went to the mosque, I noticed that not only was it a place of worship, it was really a place of community. Everybody was hanging out, and there was food, and there was a bookstore, and there was a library, and there was a school. So it was a place that everybody could really hang out and get to know one another. Weddings could be held there. There was a huge banquet hall, etc. Men were segregated from women and children for the prayer time, but you could freely intermix in the hallways and stuff like that. It was a really diverse community. I saw people of a lot of different countries all over the place, which makes sense because this area is pretty diverse. But I think it just shows also the diverse regions where Islam is these days. The sermon that the imam gave was pretty interesting because it was actually culturally relevant to this area. He talked about how we end up communicating on phones so much these days. And he told his followers that he believed that Allah would appreciate what intentions that they should be doing when they communicate. Don't be passive aggressive. Don't go to bed angry against your friend. If it's try to talk to one another in person, if at all possible, because text messages get misinterpreted. Things like that. Just all, of course, interweaving the Quran and other hadiths or spiritual sayings and customs that Muhammad put together. But yeah, it was overall very culturally and contemporary applicable. The film that I watched was a little show called Adam's World. It was hard to find a show that was not about ISIS. So I was trying to find something that was a little bit more, on my topic. And so Adam's World was like Sesame Street for Muslim children. So there's this puppet named Adam, and he teaches different themed episodes on courage and humility and other things about being a Muslim kid. There were segments about Muslims around the world. They did a segment on the history of Muslims in Spain, for example. They taught the Arabic alphabet because all good Muslims learn to read Arabic because that's how you should read the Quran is in Arabic. And they also talked about Muslim traditions and actions, such as how to pray and things like that. And finally, my interview was with a Muslim mom that I've been working with for about a year now. I've made craft projects for her, for play groups that she runs for other Muslim kids. And I've sometimes babysat her kids. And so even though we had the occasional conversation, we hadn't had a really full, in-depth conversation about Islam and her journey with it. So I took that as a good opportunity to get to know her more. The main things that came up in our conversation, she talked about how she really thought Islam was a simple religion. It was about, for her, it's about intentions even more than the actions that you do. So if you have strong intentions to live a pure, clean, and simple life, that is what matters in the end to her and what she thinks Islam is really all about. And I can see it with the way that she raises her kids. So she really instructs her kids, she doesn't say simply like, don't hit each other. She'll be like, is that a kind action or is that a mean action? She'll ask about the intention behind the action, which I thought was it's a pretty good way, I think, overall to help guide children into thinking about the bigger consequences of their actions versus do that and don't do this. Community is also really important to her. So she grew up, she was born in Australia, and she did not have a lot of Muslim community around her growing up. So she didn't really like her religion growing up until she had a kind of revelation and spiritual seeking moment in her 20s. But she sees children who are part of the Muslim community today, and she thinks that they are just somewhere more informed, and they have such a heart for their faith that she just didn't have growing up. And so that's really important for her kids, and why she leads playgroups for them so that they can all come together and help each other out when life gets rough, because that is important for everyone. So just a few quick points I wanted to say. Muslims in the Western world, especially in America, face stereotypes from people who are afraid of terrorists. I think we still have the shadow of 9/11 hanging over us when we think about Muslims, and I think that can really be hurtful for some Muslim children these days. The values of Islam are actually overall pretty good values that the kids learn based on the video and the interview that I got. And I think, you should remember that when you interact with children from Islam, that they overall actually have some pretty good values instilled in them already. And whenever you talk with a parent and you don't understand what's going on, keep in mind that they have a really strong sense of community and spiritual identity. They have a way that they were taught how to do things, and they were instructed to do things a certain way. But they're very kind, and they're very loving, and they believe in helping others out and being generous and charitable. So just things to keep in mind when you interact with any Muslims you meet in your future. Thank you for listening. Let me know if you have any questions, and have a good day. Bye.